Labour continues to be embroiled in rows over its decision to cut winter fuel allowance to some pensioners. Will the Chancellor reconsider her controversial decision? We're getting into conference season with the TUC and Liberal Democrats holding their annual jamborees this week. We'll be looking ahead to those. We'll also take a glance at the latest news from the Tory leadership contest. And we have the first, perhaps only, head-to-head presidential debate between Harris and Trump on Tuesday night. What is at stake for the two contenders? Welcome to the latest Downtown Den Politics podcast.
Just all bigoted women.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
So this week, it's just the dynamic duo of Joe Phillips, former advisor to Paddy Ashdown, and myself, Frank McKenna, the Chief Exec and Group Chair of Downtown in Business. No Jim Hancock this week, so no historical context to the conversations that we're having. We do miss the 899-year-old Jim Hancock when he's not around, but hopefully he'll be back for our 50th episode, Joe, would you believe, next week?
Wow,
Our 50th episode.
50 episodes, amazing.
Yeah, that's not bad, is it? That's not bad.
No.
Now listen, we've said before that the government made a reasonably good fist of its first couple of weeks in office, hit the ground running, got its appointments out the way early. Starmer took to the international stage, looked very statesmanlike, then, of course, handled the riots, we think, well. But they've embroiled themselves in this row for weeks now around the winter fuel allowance. And our biggest criticism, I think, of the new administration so far, Joe, has been what is seemingly a lack of communication strategy. And it struck me when I'm reading the newspapers almost daily last week, the right-wing press were having a go at this cut to winter fuel allowance. We've then got another load of people piling in over the weekend, including trade union leaders and some backbench MPs. Privately, I have to say, briefing the press against this move. You do wonder why the Chancellor Rachel Reeves felt it necessary to go so early with the announcement of that plan for her budget, which isn't until the 30th of October, particularly given the fact that she keeps now saying, I'm not going to tell you what's in the budget. You'll know what's in the budget on the 30th of October. Why, oh, why have they managed to put themselves in this position, Joe? It's totally baffling to me.
It's totally baffling because they've thrown away so much goodwill. And, you know, we've said before, Frank, they weren't elected on a wave of enthusiasm like Tony Blair was in 97. They were elected in July because they were the least worst option. But, you know, the turnout was low, the vote share was low. So nobody's in love with Labour or Keir Starmer. We know that, and they know that. What I'd love to know was there anybody within number 10 or number 11 who said, this is going to play really badly? Because either Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer completely ignored it, or there's nobody there with the wit or the balls to say, hang on a minute, you're going to do the public sector pay increases as recommended by the independent review bodies. You're going to settle the train drivers dispute. And the first thing you're going to cut is pensioners' fuel allowance. And you're going to announce it, as you say, nearly 2 months before the budget. And it wasn't in the manifesto. It's caught everybody by surprise. And they have had weeks and weeks and weeks of bad press. And, you know, a rare appearance last week by Rishi Sunak, if anyone remembers him, at Prime Minister's Questions, you know, and he scored, unusually for him, or for the Tories, in fact, a hit, which is, you know, how do you justify paying a train driver an extra £14,000 a year when you're taking away the winter fuel allowance from somebody on £13,000 a year? So, they haven't managed it well. They haven't gone through and run through how it's going to play. The weather's getting worse. We're going into the autumn. People are frightened. I mean, what I would like to hear is from some of the wealthy pensioners who say, look, I'm really happy to lose this money. I never needed it. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday who lived abroad for a very long time and was still getting £200 every winter for the winter fuel allowance. They weren't even here. They were in the sunny Mediterranean, for God's sake. And as somebody said on the radio this morning, what are you going to give Mick Jagger, a £200 winter fuel allowance? Like, he really needs it. So, they haven't sold it well. They haven't dealt with it well. I don't think there will be a rebellion, but I then think, there is a question about is abstention just a cop-out to avoid being suspended? But what you've done at a very, very early stage in a new government, new parliament, is you've created a group of people who will be perhaps drawn to or enthused by people like Jeremy Corbyn.
I think the optics are what we will criticise, Joe, not necessarily the basis for the decision, because
Exactly.
for the very reason you've outlined, there are many people who get this winter fuel allowance who, to put it bluntly, don't need it. It's always, when it comes to a means tested benefit, people who fall through the cracks. And again, credit to Rachel Reeves. She's been saying, look, there's probably another 800,000 pensioners potentially able to claim the pensioner credit, which would then enable them to claim the winter fuel allowance. But that aside, the fact is that unless you get ahead of the messaging, then
Exactly.
you are going to start to be on the back foot in these issues. And it's the politics that they've absolutely got wrong as far as this is concerned. Firstly, why make the announcement so early? Secondly, if you're going to do that, then have your list of pensioners, if you like, you could name, couldn't you, Mick Jagger and the person who lives abroad and so on and so. So you've got that strong argument that people understand, because all that people are hearing at the moment is poor pensioners losing winter fuel allowance as we're coming into a winter, and as of course we've just heard, another increase to energy prices as well. So to say, it's the optics that are really wrong about this, not necessarily the policy itself. And we keep saying this, and I'm hoping that at some point it turns around. But who is doing the politics for the new government?
Well, I mean, we've spoken about this before, Frank, about actually in relation to Rishi Sunak when he was Prime Minister. Some people are instinctive politicians. Some people are very good at strategy. Some people are very good at policy. But what I think both Rachel Reeves and to a certain extent Keir Starmer lack is that basic political instinct that somebody like Pat McFadden's got, Angela Rayner's got. John Prescott had it. I don't think Tony Blair had it, but Tony Blair had people round him who had got the political, he got the instinct of the zeitgeist, if you like, Blair had, but he'd got political people around him who could work and understand how it would play to the trade unions and things. I mean, the other thing is to be utterly brutal and possibly a little controversial. It's ever so easy to go and do a vox pop for local telly and find some poor old soul saying, oh, I'm terrified of turning on the heating this winter, and blah, 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 blah. And all these people go, oh, I've worked all my life. Nobody ever says to them, yes, you've worked all your life, you've paid your tax all your life, but you've also had free healthcare, free education, you've got probably a free bus pass, you have benefited. And this idea that it's an entitlement, is somehow wrong. But pensioners, which I find it absolutely ridiculous that a group of people are defined by the benefit they claim, not by the jobs they did or the intellect they've got or what they do now. But nobody ever says, well, hang on a minute, you've had your money's worth actually and more. But there are, as you say, I mean, there are many ways that they could have made this better. They could have said at the same time, massive campaign on pension credit, massive campaign on insulation and stuff like that, massive campaign on perhaps lowering energy bills for people on below a certain income, or doing what Steve Webb, the former pensions minister, suggested a few days ago, do it by council tax band, which would at least know that you're going to people who are most likely. It's the people, as always, who are just over the edge. They're not, their income is not low enough for them to get benefits, but it's not high enough for them to be able to cope with a sudden extra thing. But, what's being taken away is also being replaced, if you like, by the £400 increase, thanks to the triple lock, which many people would argue is unaffordable.
Yeah, the irony, of course, is the Conservatives had already indicated that they were going to scrap the winter fuel allowance. It was introduced by Gordon Brown on the basis that triple lock wasn't working for pensioners. The inflation rate was low, so wage growth was low. There was nothing that was increasing the pound for pensioners in terms of increases on an annual basis. And so on that basis, Gordon Brown introduced this new policy, but it's been in place now for obviously 15, 16 years. It was something that Cameron was offered as a cut on more than one occasion, but refused to take because he saw the political damage it could potentially cause. So, I come back to that fact. It's not that it's a bad policy, but it's been so badly. And whenever you're going to announce something that is so totemic, and anything that is to do with kids or to do with pensioners, you're always going to be likely to get the headlines. We had the 2-child cap on benefits. That was quite controversial in terms of the ruling out a change in that. Now you've got this over the pensioners. So somehow, some way, the government does have to find a way of communicating these political messages far more effectively than they've done thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be interesting to see what happens this week at the TUC. Sharon Graham from Unite has come out absolutely and said he's got to do a U-turn, or she, Rachel Reeves, has got to do a U-turn because it's her policy. Paul Novak is less brutal, and is much more conciliatory because they want to work with the government and find a way around it. But, the TUC, first time in 14 years that they've got a Labour government there. They need to work with these people. All of these people need to work together. And as you say, and as we've said, for several weeks now, it's about the optics, it's about the messaging, and it's about lining up your ducks before you put something out there, because I think it caught everybody by surprise.
And turning to that TUC conference that starts today, you would think that was going to be a fairly joyous occasion because you do have the first Labour government in 14 years. You've obviously got very strong ties and links between the trade unions and the Labour Party, although I do have to say there are a lot of unions, people don't always appreciate this, who are not affiliated to the Labour Party, but nevertheless, there's still a recognition that most of them are more aligned to Labour than they are to the Tories, of course. They've had their sort of pay increases in public sector met. The trade drivers have had an increase as well, although some of them in London are still striking, I understand, or taking industrial action. There doesn't appear to be a mood going into this conference that you would expect. They should be walking into that conference centre on air, and yet there appears to be, at least from what we're hearing from the commentary over the weekend, trade union leaders lining up to criticise Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, saying, well, if this is the sort of thing that we can expect moving forward, then you can expect us to continue to have a battle with government rather to be constructive partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, many union members will be people working in the public sector. And many of them will know and will have had to deal with the cuts, years and years and years of cuts to services. And I think what we will hear over the next couple of days is people standing up, whether they're teachers or health workers or probation officers or prison staff or anybody working in those fields. We can't cut anything else. And I think in a way it goes back to the mood that we went into the July election in, which was there wasn't much enthusiasm for politics, thanks to 14 years of utter chaos, shambles, Brexit, Boris Johnson, etc., etc. So we went into an election, everybody wanted change, but nobody feels terribly enthusiastic, and nothing has changed, apparently. And, you know, the government has been absolutely clear, and we all knew, as did the trade unions and everybody who voted at all, that nothing was going to change overnight. And we've got the winter coming, and, you know, so on and so forth. So I think there is a sort of a general, there's a sort of gloominess. I think there's a gloominess when you go into the autumn anyway. The weather changes, and, you know, people's moods change. And I think, you know, that is probably reflected in the TUC, but you would think that there would be the, wow, at last we've got rid of the Tories effect, which it may come in the next couple of days. But it's not apparent at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister is going to make an address to the TUC conference. I'm sure he'll get a warm reception, but his messaging is important. He's got a problem in a sense in that timing-wise, his own Labour Party conference isn't until the end of the month. He'll obviously want to keep some big announcements for then. So his messaging, I think, is going to be quite nuanced. I think he'll continue with this message of things are tough. We've inherited a bit of a shit fest. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But sooner rather than later, Joe, they've got to start to give some positive messaging, some of that vision, some of that joy that we saw from the DNC conference in the United States recently, so that people do give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that's the problem at the moment, isn't it? They're making all these tough choices, these really hard announcements, and people are saying, we voted for change, we don't appear to be getting it.
No, although, you know, if you were being absolutely purist about it, what we have got, which is a much harder sell, and the biggest change of all, is a Prime Minister who is willing to be absolutely straight with people. And, you know, he did the interview yesterday with Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC. He's not being pushed. He's not saying, well, you know, I do understand. I mean, he does say he's understanding, but he's not appearing to waver in his commitment to cutting the winter fuel allowance. And, you know, you could say, actually, the tough Keir Starmer that we've seen that dealt with the rioters in Southport and elsewhere is the same person who is telling you now, I am straight with you. And in a way, that's a selling point, but it's a hard selling point when you're the person on the receiving end of it, or the pensioners are on the receiving end of it, for no apparent reason, as we've just discussed. I mean, I think, you know, history will probably judge him more kindly. And I think, you know, if we have this conversation in a year's time, things probably will have changed considerably. But I think, you know, you're right. He does need to do something, but he is looking tougher by the day. And I think that's a good thing. And somehow or other, and again, it comes back to communications and messaging, his messaging has got to be, yeah, you heard all the absolute bullshit and unicorns and rainbows from the last lot. What you get from me is absolutely, I tell it as it is. And if that's grey and dull and boring and hard, so be it.
And I would be amazed. Yeah, I'd be amazed if there was any sort of change or U-turn. I think there will be some more positive announcements moving forward from the Chancellor and from the Prime Minister. And my criticism, as I've said, is not necessarily that the policy is a bad one, but the way in which it's been managed communication-wise. So we talk about the TUC coming together, should be a more joyous occasion than in previous years. The Liberal Democrats, they will be having the party of all parties, won't they? I mean, they've never had this many MPs in living memory. They're getting together on Saturday. They've had to abandon the telephone box where they usually hold their annual conferences. And, you know, listen, Ed Davey, absolute revelation, not necessarily, I don't think, being given the credit he deserved for the strategy he laid out, which was very clearly target those Tory seats in the blue wall and take them out. Use tactical voting where you can. Do a bit of a side deal, I guess, with the Labour Party in certain seats. It paid dividends, and hopefully Ed, and we're looking forward to seeing what stunt he pulls during that conference, I'm sure, will get the adulation he absolutely deserves from his party this week.
Yes, I hope so. I mean, they have every reason to go into that conference really feeling completely buoyed, and deservedly so. The other thing that I think was really absolutely key to the Liberal Democrats' success, they chose two topics, two issues: sewage in the seas and rivers and social care. And they stuck to those. Absolutely. They didn't get, of course, they were asked questions about other things like defence and transport and education. But those were the two things that they hammered home. And I think, the lesson, when the Lib Dems have performed well, it's because they play to their strengths and they use the resources that they've got wisely. They know they're not going to form a government, so you do target seats, you do tactical voting, and where necessary, you work with other parties. You don't put up a candidate if you know Labour or the Greens are going to win. But you have two very clear issues where you've got a voice. I mean, when I was working for Paddy Ashdown, Paddy Ashdown and Ming Campbell had a bigger voice and more knowledge and were more respected in many areas of foreign and defence policy. And in fact, we used to brief Robin Cook, who was the Labour Foreign Secretary, from our various trips to Bosnia and wherever. So, you just get a thing for that. And I think, what we've seen with the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper, I think, performed very well in the leader debates. And I think people saw in a Davy, a human being. We all know the tragic story of his very disabled son and the burden that he carries as a carer, and his history of his mother dying so young and all of that sort of stuff. But what we saw was somebody very human, somebody relatable. And I think, what's interesting is that there is a relationship, there is a connection between Keir Starmer and Ed Davey. And I think Ed Davey has made it very clear that he is willing to be working with the government rather than opposing them for opposition's sake. And obviously, because they've now got so many MPs, he does get more questions at Prime Minister's question time. They've got people on select committees. So you begin to let your influence trickle through.
Yeah, we'll start to see the Liberal Democrats' profile increase over the future months and years because of that very reason, Joe. 70 odd MPs, it gets you that, doesn't it? It buys you that credibility in a sense. But I think the point that you make about Starmer and Davey, you can understand why they get on, because they are both serious politicians. They're serious guys. They do want to make change. They do want to deliver. And so you can imagine that behind the scenes they have a good relationship. I just wonder whether that Liberal Democrat conference may have come at the right time for the Conservative Party, who are embroiled in this very, very long, talk about the Labour Party ballsing up its communication strategy. I think the Tories needed to take time in terms of choosing its next leader, but I'm not sure I'd have chosen this selection process. And the reason I say, has the Lib Dem conference come at a good time for them? Perhaps it will remind some of them that actually they lost more votes to the Liberal Democrats than they did to Reform. And yet it is the candidates who appear to have more than one eye on Farage and Reform that appear to be doing better in that contest. And of course, my dark horse candidate, Priti Patel, has already hit the buffers. I mean, she's gone. She fell at the first fence. So just to explain to listeners, Tories 6 candidates on the shortlist. One was taken out last week in the first round of ballots, and that was Priti Patel, who got a paltry 14 votes. She's complaining that it was dirty tricks, but that's what happens in leadership campaigns of all political parties. So we're now down to 5, and I think that Robert Jenrick topped the poll with 28 votes of the 120 Tory MPs who can cast in this particular polling. Joe, what are you seeing from that contest? I know you won't be watching it in any great detail.
Well,
but
I'd almost believed you, Frank. I thought, oh no, maybe he's talking sense. Maybe Priti Patel is the dark horse. As it is, she's gone to the knackers yard. So, Frank McKenna, the punter's friend, I don't think so. I should stick to the day job. I was quite surprised that she got knocked out so soon, actually. I think I was on a TV programme the other day with Conor Burns, who lost his seat, Tory MP. And what he said was, what's astonishing is when you look at the numbers, you realise how few MPs there are. And I think that's actually, they're so tiny that it's sort of like, actually, do we care? Do we care? Should we care? Whoever wins is not going to be the next leader or the next Tory Prime Minister. So if they're looking for a safe pair of hands whilst they decide whether they chase reform or whether they try to discover what they used to be, or whether they work out that actually most of their loyal voters have died off, frozen to death by the Labour Party, they can use that as an excuse. But, they need to regroup. They need to think what they're there for. They need to think what they stand for. They need to recognise that they were punished for the misdemeanours of the leaders, all of whom were supported in various ways by all of the people who are standing for the leadership right now. Let's not forget. So, maybe Robert Jenrick or James Cleverly are the people to take them through the next couple of years until they get to a point. I mean, it is a bizarre way to do it because I don't think anybody's particularly interesting. But I tell you what I think is even more bizarre is that Rishi Sunak is not going to make a speech at the Conservative conference.
No,
which is, I know, we all know he wants to get back to America, and having said he'll, serve on the backbenches as they all do, and the only one who did was Theresa May. We know he wants to be gone and off and out, and it's amazing that he actually turned up for Prime Minister's questions last week. But actually, it is pretty insulting to the people who have been out canvassing, campaigning, stuffing envelopes, delivering leaflets, that you can't even be bothered to make a speech to the party faithful to say thank you for your efforts and I'm sorry we got it completely wrong. I mean, it's rude, isn't it?
I think so, although probably most of those in the hall don't want to hear from him. So they wouldn't necessarily see it as a snub, rather a bonus. And of course, they will have to sit through 4 speeches, because what happens tomorrow is that 5 becomes 4. I will think, although my predictions have not been particularly good, as you pointed out, Joe, quite rightly, Mel Stride will be struggling to stay in the race.
Well, you see, he's backed by Jim Hancock, and that in itself is a kiss of death, surely.
Tom Cleverly, the other one who's gone, of course.
Yes,
it's another one of Jim's candidates. I mean, Badenoch is the one that the members clearly want, but the Tory MPs don't like her, and so they will do what they can to keep her off the final ballot of 2, which is when the members get their say and make a decision. It's whether or not the Conservative Parliamentary Party has the bottle to keep off the favourite, if indeed she remains the favourite. Jenrick would be a gift for Labour. I think Cleverly will cause some problems, but he's so much baggage that Starmer could throw at him for his role over the last 14 years. Probably the best candidate who no chance of winning would be Tugendhat, actually, but as I say, he's got no chance of winning the members, has he?
I don't think so, but I mean, if they've got any sense, if they really, really want Kemi Badenoch to be the leader who becomes the next Tory Prime Minister, then it would be better if she lost and there was somebody like Jenrick or Tugendhat or Cleverly right now, because then she can concentrate on what she wants the Tory party that she leads to do, because there is no point. And I speak with to paraphrase Tony Blair, with the scars on my back of various Liberal Democrat leaderships. After Paddy went, it was disaster after disaster. Up until Nick Clegg, and then of course the fateful coalition which did for the Lib Dems in the following election. So I sort of think but I'm not sure that the Conservative Party, either in Parliament or without Parliament, have got enough self-awareness and enough ability to think, where do we want to be in 5 years' time? Because so many of them are locked in the past, either because they want to go back to pounds, shillings and pence and, TV closed down at 10 o'clock in case it encourages beatniks or something like that, or they yearn for the days of Boris Johnson. And don't forget, these are the people who gave us Liz Truss. It wasn't the MPs, it was the members. So, can these people be trusted? Should they indeed have a winter fuel allowance if they're over the pensionable age? I don't think so.
Yeah, it is a problem that political parties have in terms of selection of leaders. Labour ended up with Corbyn, Tories ended up with Johnson, with Truss. Bad choices for the country, certainly. And there is definitely a case where MPs eventually make the final choice, in my opinion. I would not have said this 20, 30 years ago, by the way, the view that I take now, because the political parties have shrunk in membership, all of them. Tories in particular have shed lots and lots of members in recent times. And again, in particular, the Tory party is a very narrow cohort of the population, most of them over the age of 55. So the idea that they should be left with that momentous decision as it was to select the Prime Minister, not just the leader of the Tory party, is quite ridiculous. So we'll see. I mean, none of the candidates are promising anything other than more power to the members, of course, because that's what they have to do. But I think that there's William Hague who introduced the one member, one vote into the Tory party, and he said it was the worst decision he made as leader of the Conservatives, and he made quite a few. So there you go. Joe, should we have a short break whilst you sort out your cat? And when we come back, we'll be looking ahead to the US presidential election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Stay with us. We'll be back in a minute.
This is the time of year when many of us are just returning from holiday and looking at how we're going to end the year in business with a bang. And with that in mind, Downtown in Business has put together an absolutely fantastic events programme for the remainder of 2024, including 3 awards dinners: the City of Manchester Business Awards, the City of Birmingham Business Awards, and our 22nd annual Liverpool Awards. So something to look forward to, and good luck to all the nominees. Many other events, of course, as well. If you go onto our website, all the W's, downtowninbusiness.com, click on the events section and you will see what we have confirmed so far. But among the highlights, we've got the leader of Manchester City Council, Bev Craig, joining us for a roundtable event. We've got the new Chief Executive of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Caroline Simpson, come along for a downtown event. In Liverpool, we've got the leader of the council, Liam Robinson, joining us. We have Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of Liverpool City Region, and Andrew Lewis, Chief Executive of the council as well. Plus a special event with the Liverpool Big Company, a conference on the 5th of September, People, Power, Places. Moving to the south and Birmingham, we're having an event with Naomi Smith, who is the Chief Executive of Best for Britain, who will be reflecting on the general election results and the new government. She'll be joined by Ryan Wayne, who is the Head of Policy at the Tony Blair Institute. And we've also got some great events across other parts of our region in Lancashire, in Cheshire, Newcastle and Leeds as well. As I say, go to our website and you'll see all the details there. We look forward to meeting you at those events. And as I say, it's going to be a great end to the year if you're a member of Downtown in Business.
Welcome back to the second part of this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast with me, Frank McKenna, and Joe Phillips. No Jim Hancock this week, although we are told Mr. Hancock will rejoin us Next week, no doubt he's on another one of these holidays that you can afford when you're getting all these fabulous benefits as a pensioner. But anyway, enough of that. Let's go overseas and back to the American presidential election, which has become very exciting since Joe Biden decided he wasn't going to stand for re-election. And the contest is now between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, of course. Fabulous DNC, Democrat National Convention in Chicago recently. Poll numbers increasing for Harris and the Democrats, and her running mate, Walz. What's his first name, Joe? I always forget. Tim Walz. Tim Walz. And, you know, definitely a closer race. But Trump still maintaining a slight lead in some of those key swing states. And what amazes people like you and I, Joe, I think, is how Trump is even in with a chance, but he is, which makes this television debate, which is happening on Tuesday night, which will be watched by millions of Americans, crucially important, because it's probably the first time many of them are going to see Kamala Harris up close and personal. You may think as vice president, everybody in the States would know who she was, but it's a bit of a non-job in a sense. And she, as I say, will be introducing herself to many, many people tomorrow night. And I think it's a bigger test for her than it is for Trump, because everybody sort of knows what you expect and get from the Don.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you're absolutely right. She's got more to lose than he has. I mean, he'll just come out with another word salad. And you'll think, God, I must adjust the colour setting on my television because he seems to be a really, really odd colour. She, of course, we know is a former prosecutor. She's cool, but she manages to be warm and empathetic at the same time, which is something that Trump doesn't. And I think what's really happened, and you know, that's largely down to Tim Walz, her running mate, since he called Trump weird, that they're now ridiculing Trump. Instead of attacking him on policies because he hasn't got any, they're actually sort of saying, you are a joke, you're a joke. But, you know, underneath the spotlights, you know, we know what happened to Richard Nixon and Jack Kennedy in that famous first televised debate. You know, Nixon sweated, he'd got the 5 o'clock shadow, he looked decidedly untrustworthy, whereas Kennedy looked as though he'd just come off his boat, which he had at Hyannisport, you know, looking suntanned, gorgeous and young. So I think in terms of optics, which you talked about before the break, Kamala Harris will come out. I think her problem is going to be how she responds to any particular accusations, and I imagine that Trump will go hard on immigration and border control. He'll, you know, rubbish the US economy, which of course is nonsense. But the one thing that she's got, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, is who was saying, oh, why doesn't Taylor Swift come out and say vote for Harris? And I said, she doesn't need to say vote for Harris. She just needs to say, if you're a woman, don't vote for Trump. That's all you need to say. You're not endorsing the other one. I think the fact that the thing that I thought was very encouraging for Kamala Harris is that Dick Cheney said he will not vote for Trump. And I think there must be quite a lot of people within the Republican Party, you know, in a way, a sort of mirror of what we've seen in this country, of people who go, yeah, I'm still a Republican, not a Democrat, but I cannot vote for this man. And I think that's quite interesting. Apparently, voter registration has gone up hugely, and that is mainly among younger and ethnic minorities and young women, who one would assume are more likely to vote Democrat than Republican. But the electoral system in America, Frank, as you and I both know, is so convoluted and complicated that even though they're both running neck and neck at the moment, you know, we could be going into hanging chads right up to January.
It could get to a point where there's challenges, and we know Trump's got form as far as that is concerned. And of course, what people do forget perhaps is that back in 2016, Hillary Clinton actually gained 3 million more votes than Trump, but still lost the election because it's based on this very strange state system whereby each state gets a certain amount of delegates, and it's winner takes all.
Yeah.
Which is a very, very bizarre voting system. We criticise first past the post in this country, but the American system beggars belief in a sense. I think that if Kamala can focus on those women's issues, the weird, and as Tim Walters said very effectively, government, stay out of my business, stay out of my bedroom, stay out of my decision making. The IVF issue is really hurting Donald Trump at the moment. So he's managed to fall out with everybody as far as that's concerned, because initially he came out, at least a big part of his constituency, the sort of radical Christian right, anti-IVF. Trump has reacted to criticism of that particular approach by saying, well, the government will pay for anybody who wants IVF. Well, that's like $7 billion written off that nobody has accounted for. So he's got himself into all sorts of problems as far as that's concerned. And then in terms of reproductive rights, he's said 6 weeks isn't long enough to allow people to make a decision if they do want to terminate a pregnancy. So again, he's falling out with some of his own core supporters there. She can stick him on those subjects rather than get bogged down in the detail of stuff, because again, we all know, and it's sad but true, the detail is not what people are listening out for. It's those broad brush, contextual messages that the candidates can get out. And she's been good at that so far, Kamala Harris.
I think so. And I think, although like all of these things, she's not necessarily talking to the people at home who are going to be sitting watching it. It's talking to the media. It's talking to the media around the world. And she will be rated and examined and marked out of 10 very highly. But I think if she manages to rattle him, which I don't think will be difficult, because he absolutely hates women and he absolutely hates smart women, and he absolutely hates her because he wasn't expecting to stand against her. He was expecting to stand against doddery old Joe. Now he's got this smart, clever, attractive, young, vibrant woman who represents a future where he represents what? And I think if she manages to rile him without her, I don't think she'd have to do very much. People will see the very, very nasty side of him, and they'll also see the misogynist side of him, and they'll also see, not just the mad rambling rant. They'll see something that is dangerous, that should not be allowed near a nuclear button.
And that's where she's got to try and sort of press the debate tomorrow night. Somebody did say to me, I thought it was a great point, it's almost nothing Trump can say now that would shock somebody. It's baked in that you anticipate that Trump is going to say something that's outrageous, that's something that, as you say, word salad is what we've come to expect from him. Whereas Kamala Harris is on show and is expected to be the serious politician up there. It may be unfair in terms of how people are going to judge that debate, but that's where we are. And it is going to be, because the race is so tight, quite a crucial debate, perhaps the most crucial since that debate you referenced, which was the very first one between Kennedy and Nixon. Again, of course, a very tight race, which eventually JFK won. So we will see. We'll review that particular debate next week. So we'll move on now, Joe, to the Grenfell inquiry, because I know that you were exercised enough to write your blog on this, and I think some great points that you made in terms of the length of time, what use these inquiries are. So as far as those inquiries are concerned, Joe, Grenfell the latest, but we've had many others, of course, and like me, I think you're frustrated in terms of the length of time these things take, but also what is the bloody use of them ultimately? Yeah,
I know. And I think, we're the only country in the world that does these. And actually today is the next lot of modules for the COVID inquiry. And, one of the reports that's going into that is from an anti-corruption unit that has discovered, guess what? Billions of pounds, more than the £22 billion black hole, was given in dodgy contracts by Boris Johnson's government. Now, there's an argument and it's for another day. But if Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves could get that back, they wouldn't have to cut winter fuel. What is the point of a public inquiry? I suppose it makes a wider audience hear who is to blame and what went wrong. But, you know, if you look at the post office scandal, it took that excellent ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the post office, to actually bring it home to people. And goodness me, you know, all of a sudden, every MP, all of whom will have had a sub-postmaster or mistress in their constituency, but had paid no attention, all of a sudden they're in the House of Commons and they're suddenly interested in it. So what does it achieve? Not very much. The cost is enormous, you know, and we're all paying for it. The time is horrific. I mean, even if Grenfell went out and, you know, the police and the PCC, DPP, went out and arrested every one of those people named in it, the chances of them ever getting to court or being punished are so thin. And I think that's the problem. Do we want a public inquiry in order to avoid repeating those mistakes? Well, yes, that would be a nice idea. But, you know, the Lakenhall House fire inquest, which I was involved in, all of those things about cladding were brought up then. The coroner wrote a letter to the then Secretary of State, Eric Pickles, who did nothing about it. And, you know, look what happened, Grenfell, several years later. So, you know, do we want to try and avoid the mistakes? Yes, we do. Do we want to blame people and see them brought to justice? Probably more so, and certainly for victims and certainly for, you know, the bereaved families. But that's not going to happen out of a public inquiry. And what happens is at the end of it, somebody goes, oh, this is terrible, this must never happen again, we've learnt lessons. And blow me, the same thing happens over and over again. You know, on a grand scale, we've got COVID, we've had Hillsborough, we've got post office, we've had the contaminated blood scandal, and umpteen others. On a smaller scale, every time you have a child safety review, or whether you have, you know, the Rochdale inquiry, we see it time and time again. And in the end, the documents that so many people have put so much time and effort to, you know, they sit there gathering dust. And does it make any difference? I mean, you know, I do think one of the things that Keir Starmer said immediately afterwards, and I have to say that I thought both Starmer and Sunak were extremely good in the Commons on Wednesday. And it was good that there was no blame shifting. There was an absolute straightforward apology from both of them. And I also thought Michael Gove was very interesting in the Sunday Times this weekend, saying that he tried to change things. Now, you know, he doesn't have an axe to grind. He was actually writing letters about Kingspan and those people back in 2019. But if somebody as smart and as diligent and as well respected within the civil service couldn't get things changed as a government minister, as a Secretary of State, then it doesn't hold out a lot of hope for other people. And I think we need to sort of think about, what are these for? Or should there be a time limit on them? You know, should they be done, but they've got to report within a year or 18 months or something? Because this 7 years on and on and on, and millions, billions of pounds that could be spent on something else, I think we have to ask why.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Joe, and there's nothing I could add to your comments there. Fully endorse what you've said. And the length of time, okay, people may say, well, people eventually get justice. Well, I always say slow justice is no justice. Yeah. And 7 years on from that tragedy, then I think it's small consolation, actually. So, yeah, and as you rightly say, cost the country absolutely millions, if not billions of pounds. And none of these inquiries seem to turn the dial particularly radically either. So,
no, I mean, I think Keir Starmer's thing about, you know, none of the companies named will be allowed to bid for public contracts, I think is really quite important. But, you know, do the people who used to work for those companies who then appear at another company, you know, that's
moved on. And that's the point you made, isn't it? If that inquiry would have had a time limit of a year, then there's a difference to be made. And it's, dare I say this, in the context of the tragedy, of course, money doesn't matter in a sense, but it would cost a lot less. But you get a better outcome as well, and people will feel more satisfied if it was done in that sort of speed. But to the last 7 years, and all these inquiries drag on and on and on,
Yeah.
don't they? And the people who, of course, make fortunes are the solicitors. But we won't. We won't get
And the
into
money
that.
that's been spent, could have paid for the cost of, sorting out the cladding on the number of places that are still covered in inflammable cladding. The amount of money that's been spent on the COVID inquiry and will have been spent by the time it comes to an end could have gone into the health service.
Yeah, exactly.
And yes, you do need to have some sort of accountability, but accountability without action is pointless.
Very frustrating. Very frustrating. Anyway, I'm sure it won't be the last time we are frustrated by a public inquiry. There'll be one along any moment. And as you say, Joe, the COVID inquiry continues to rumble on. I would like to see the government focus on those dodgy deals and try and get some of our money back. That would certainly be resource well spent. So we'll see what happens as far as that's concerned. Anyway, that's it from us, the Downtown Den Politics podcast this week. As I say, next week we're back for our 50th episode. The historian Jim Hancock will be back with us as well, I'm told. So we look forward to that. Have a great week. Enjoy the conference at the TUC if you're going along to that, or indeed next weekend. Saturday, I think, the Liberal Democrat conference starts. And if you are a Tory leadership runner, then what you absolutely do not want is my endorsement. So good luck, Kenny. See you all next week. Cheers, guys.